back in South Carolina. Started my text in the mag. Amazing people last week upset for game costs, but they get over it. So I'm glad to see all of you. Look forward to having a great conversation here, asking some great questions as well. And so, of course, as I said, I'm with host and manager here of News One Now on TV One. We are the first and the only national morning show that speaks to the issues of African Americans, or as I say, news for us, by us. And certainly glad to be here. And so glad to be here at Claflin, and we look forward to a great conversation. We're live streaming this as well. We're taking lots of questions, and so what we expect is to talk specific issues. No gotcha stuff. It's all about hearing specific policies and plans. So we look forward to that. So let's not wait any longer. Let me introduce to you right now, folks, Democratic presidential candidate, Secretary Hillary Clinton. We did not coordinate our outfits, just let me know.
Yeah, I told him he looked pretty sharp.
Well, you know, black host, black show, black network.
Yeah, but I don't know how you did
The pocket square?
Yeah,
Oh,
you
you
gotta
know.
show me how you did that. That was really good.
Brothers, my daddy taught me well. Let's jump right into it. Yesterday, jobs report came out for October. Unemployment rate drops to 5.0% for African Americans, it's 9.2%. Is there a need for a New Deal 2.0, a Marshall Plan that targets those most in need, as opposed to folks who say you can't do anything race-based, but you make it need-based, it will impact African Americans, Latinos, or anybody else? What is your jobs plan specifically for those who don't have the opportunity to live?
First of all, I am really relieved and pleased that overall we're making progress. And I have gone across this country making the point that when President Obama came into office, he inherited the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression. And he doesn't get the credit he deserves for digging us out of that big hole. It's been a long, slow effort, which thanks to him and his leadership and many, many millions of Americans, we are exactly where Roland said we are, down to 5% unemployment, jobs are coming back, but incomes are not rising. And so we have two big problems. One, we got to get incomes for everybody to go back up. And number two, we got to get more good jobs, and we do need, in my opinion, a targeted effort at people and communities that have not had the benefits of the recovery thus far, and we need to go even further. So very quickly, we need, once and for all, to have a very big infrastructure program on our roads, our bridges, tunnels, airports, rail systems, where we can put millions of people to work. Number two, we need to combat climate change by becoming the clean energy superpower of the 21st century. That means putting up wind turbines and installing solar panels and doing energy efficiency work and all the work that will enable us not only to have the economy grow, but move away from fossil fuels. We need to start investing in small business, and my particular hope is that I can be the small business president, and I want to focus on women and minority-owned
African Americans have not been able to get those construction jobs. They have not been able to be with those engineers. So what will you say to those trade unions? Stop freezing out black folks and minorities from those opportunities.
I think we have two problems that unfortunately have the same result. Where people are frozen out, or equally importantly, not sought out. I want to make sure every training program is reflective of our population. I want to provide an apprenticeship credit to companies, to unions, to others, to train young people particularly, but not just young anymore. We've got a lot of folks who lost their jobs who are early middle age, and even older. and they need to be given some special attention. But we also have a problem, labor unions are not the problem in much of the South, because they're all right-to-work states. And so we've got to make sure that anywhere we do infrastructure, if the federal government has any money into it, there must be a program for recruiting and hiring, and where necessary, training people from less advantaged communities. And that's going to be a challenge.
Wall Street Journal had a report March 14, 2014, where $23.09 billion for small business loans handed out in 2013. African Americans got 1.7% of $282 billion. But for the last year of President Bush, 2008, it was 8.2% for African Americans. Housing prices have a lot to do with that. The SBA administrator, she and I have met several times, and they're trying to improve that. That's a perfect example. You got 1.9 million black-owned businesses, they cannot get access to capital. How will you utilize the federal government, utilize the SBA to ensure that expands, as opposed to, again, getting 1.7% of $23 billion?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, when I was a senator from New York, this was one of the big issues that I had, because the federal government has a lot of contracts. But sometimes it's difficult for small businesses to know how to apply for those contracts. The procurement rules are really difficult. So I used to run procurement outreach programs and a big conference where we sought out small businesses. And again, with a special emphasis on minority and women-owned businesses. I think we've got to do that all the time. It can't be just a one-off deal. You've got to have a much more vigorous effort to reach out and help people, number one, apply for the contracts that are available. There is, and I agree with this, there is a preference in the law for small businesses that are minority and women-owned. I want to make sure that preference is translated into benefits, and it doesn't just sit on the books and it doesn't have any results.
But also have bureaucrats who actually make the job.
100%. Well, look, in my administration, what I want to do is to set some goals and tell people who work for me, this is what I want you to do. And if we really measure what we're doing, we can get results and we can change outcomes.
In 2010, I had a meeting with the Treasury Department with two officials who said that black and Hispanic firms outperform everyone else in the management of target funds. My follow-up question was, did they get more money? The answer was no. What you have here, you have a good old boy system on the election Treasury Department. It's the only department that shares along with the White House. Is that a perfect example of, if you're president, you will tell your Treasury Secretary, you are to do what Mayor Jackson did, put economic power with political power. David Harrison did, as governor of New York, and say, no, you are going to expand those opportunities. If they're outperforming everybody else, they should get more business.
Well, if somebody tells you that a group or a person is outperforming everybody else, your question is the right question. Well, then are you going to reward that person or that group or business for having done that? My answer is yes. And I want, you mentioned a couple of examples. See, I think that when you look at the economy, there are opportunities that we are not seizing on behalf of communities and individuals. And I don't think there's any doubt at all that we've got to do more to open doors and to rebuild those ladders of opportunity. So when it comes to businesses, particularly as I say, small business, minority and women-owned, I'm going to be vigilant and I'm going to drive people to get results. And what I like about what you said is, we're not doing this as charity, we're doing it as business. We want good business people to have more opportunities. And when they do well, we need to reward that, and that's what I intend to do.
For the last 7 years, 53% of black wealth is white.
You talk so fast. Am I talking too fast in response? Raise your hand if you think we're both talking too fast. But he's got a lot to ask. I'm sorry.
Well, yeah, well, they're saying rap long. I got some other stuff to ask.
I know.
53% of black wealth was wiped out in the foreclosure crisis. Elizabeth Warren said when she was on the congressional committee, it would take 2 generations for African Americans just to recoup that money. One of the things the federal government did not do, and I will say this here, one of the greatest failures of the Obama administration has been their housing policies. HAMP was supposed to help 4 million people, only help 900,000. Will you
07 and 08, Roland. In fact, I was very unhappy that we did not do enough to help people who were in their homes save their homes. So I will look for ways to try to, number one, stop the damage so that we don't lose more homes because people still haven't recovered. But number two, we've got to get back into the home ownership business. And a lot of financial institutions are reluctant to loan. And they're more reluctant to loan to African American and Latino.
Well, they're sitting on housing stock that earlier were distressed assets, and now they're simply selling those off the hedge fund.
And I don't agree with that. I think that's wrong. And we're now starting to see some of the bad behavior coming from the folks who bought those homes. You know, they're forcing people out. Big article today about misleading people and forcing them to turn over their home under false pretenses. So you're right. You know, what happened in 07, 08 is just beyond horrible. You know, 9 million people lost their jobs, 5 million lost their homes, and $13 trillion in family wealth was wiped out. Most of it in home ownership, but also IRAs, 401ks, college funds. Everybody had to take the money out in order to live. So we have a lot of catching up to do, and it's not enough if just some people recover. I want to do what I can to help everybody recover.
In 1991, I graduated from college and I interviewed the Birmingham News. All 16 editors there wanted to hire me, but the HR department said no because my credit was poor. The increasing number of people across this country will be denied jobs because of credit reports and credit scores. Do you support Congresswoman Maxine Waters' bill that deals with the issue of repairing the Fair Credit Act, and in most cases wiping out requirements to have folks go through credit checks when they're applying for jobs, federal contractors as well as federal agencies?
You know, that I generally agree with that. I don't know the specific of Maxine's legislation, but I will obviously look at it immediately, but I want to make two general points. One, sometimes credit reports are wrong. But let's deal with that problem because
her act deals with that.
Yes, and that is a serious problem for a lot of people. Secondly, look, I think a lot of credit problems, particularly for young people, have to do with student debt, have to do with credit cards that they had to use in order to stay in college, in order to pay their education. There are a lot of reasons why I don't think you should have credit reports following you around like some anchor that you have to carry with you. So yeah, I want people to be responsible. I want them to pay their debt, but I also want to make sure you got a second chance. And it shouldn't be that you are denied a job that has nothing to do, as I understand, working for the Birmingham newspaper would have with your credit score or your credit situation. So we need to take a hard look at that, and I'll look at Maxine's bill.
Last Friday, you were in Atlanta. There were people who were there who interrupted your speech. Some of them Black Lives Matter. Do you fully understand the reticence of some folks when they say, under your president, he signed into, under your husband, who's president, he signed into law the crime bill that has contributed to the mass incarceration fraud. He signed a welfare bill that many say is onerous as well. Do you understand their sentiment? And one of the other questions is, why not roll out your entire criminal justice program at one time as opposed to individual speeches?
Well, first of all, I do understand the sense of frustration and disappointment and even outrage that young people like those that were in Atlanta last week feel, because there's a lot of things that need to be fixed, and they're impatient, and they deserve to be impatient. They deserve to hear answers from people like me running for office, particularly president. I've met with them. I've had some very good, open, productive conversations with representatives of the Black Lives Matter movement. I wish they had listened, because a lot of what we have talked about together are part of the proposals that I'm making. And the reason we roll them out, and this is an interesting point to make to you as a leading member of the press, is you get more attention paid to them. If you put it out one day, it's a one-day story. If you roll them out, you get covered as you roll them out. So we've been rolling out, starting with the very first speech that I gave in this campaign back in, March or April, about criminal justice reform, incarceration reform, and we're going to keep doing that because I want people to look at what I'm proposing. We're going to reduce minimum mandatory sentences. We're going to finally remove the difference between powder and crack cocaine, which has been a terrible, unfair burden. We are going to ban the box and let people apply for jobs, and only at the end, if they get to that end, they get to be, they talk about whatever record they might have. We're going to invest much more in treatment and recovery and support and jobs and training programs. So we have a very robust agenda, and I feel very committed to this, and I particularly want young people who share the impatience and the disappointment. And I think we should be talking about going forward, but I will say, back in the 90s, that bill was in response to a horrific decade of crime, and leaders of the communities of color and poor communities were in the forefront saying, you must do something. And it was done, and it did have a lot of positive but also negative unintended consequences. That's why we have to take another look. That's what a democracy should do. Look at the evidence and make changes based on it.
We're going to go to a question in the audience, but you mentioned mandatory minimums. Why not get rid of all of it and allow judges to have the discretion as opposed to still having mandatory minimums when you got some folks who are in jail for 20, 30 years for small offenses?
Well, we want to get rid of the nonviolent, low-level offenses being a way to go into jail or prison. We think there's a lot more diversionary work that can be done about that. But Roland, this is like everything else. It cuts both ways. And if you reduce the mandatory minimums, I believe then we can see, does it reduce discrimination? And discrimination can be on both sides, because what happens right now, which you know so well, is that African American men are far more likely to be arrested, to be charged, to be convicted, to be incarcerated for doing the same things as white men. So we want to reduce those minimums, but we also don't want to open the door to a different form of discrimination. So we're looking hard at how this would actually be applied in the real world.
Question?
Secretary Clinton, thank you so much for being here this afternoon. I have a myriad of issues that are of concern to me personally. I have eligible parents. I have a 16-year-old niece now preparing for college. I'm a working, career-minded African-American woman. But my main question is, how do we hold, or what's the plan of accountability for companies for disparities in pay between men and women? And then how can we as women ensure that we are receiving equal pay for the same work?
Amen. Amen. I have to tell you, I do not do a town hall anywhere in America without being asked this question. And for all those Republicans who say this is not a real world problem, I wish they would come to my town hall, because I don't know who they're talking to, because it is. And I think there are several things we do. Number one, just talking about it, making sure people can't ignore it or diminish it or pretend that it's somebody else's problem. But then we have to enforce the laws that are already on the books, and I will do that vigilantly, because this is not just a woman's issue. This is a family issue. This is an economic issue. And the other thing is, one of the things that, and you got right to it, one of the things that stands in the way of knowing how widespread this is the fact that in many businesses you can be fired for asking somebody else in the business how much they're paid. So a lot of women don't know they are being paid less than the men that they're working beside doing the same job. That's what happened to Lily Ledbetter, the woman in Alabama who had worked in a big factory for years. She got promoted okay. She became the first woman foreman, I guess, or woman forewoman. And she worked there, and it was only by accident she learned that although there were 4 or 5 men doing the very same job, she was being paid less. So I want to remove any doubt that transparency is acceptable, and if there needs to be changes in the rules or the laws about businesses so that they cannot retaliate, so that you can find out how much you're being paid, so you can compare your pay to other workers in the same situation. I'll tell you just a real quick story. A young man came up to me in New Hampshire. He said to me, I want to tell you why I'm for you, and he's like in his mid to late 20s. He said his first real job was working as a cashier in the same store that his mother worked in, part of a chain. And he was 17, and he was so proud because this was like the first job, and he got it because his mother introduced him to somebody. It was, great. So he comes home with his first paycheck. His mother looks at him, her face falls, and she tells him, "You're making $1 more an hour than I am, and I've been there 4 years." So he went to find out, and the manager said, "Well, yeah, you're a young man. We think you've got a lot of potential to go up in the business." And, "Well, what about my mother?" So we're going to tackle this, and we're going to end it.
Another question here. Go ahead.
Roland, first of all, thank you for all that you do. We're proud of you.
I appreciate it.
Madam President, we've got a problem here, not only in South Carolina, but in most of the southern states and throughout the United States, with guns. And we know the NRA is just adamant about not doing anything to do away with these guns. But what we need to do is to find out, what will you do to get rid of all these guns that are on the streets, that are in the homes, that are inadvertently killing youngsters in their homes? What will you do to help us out?
Well, this is an issue that I just think we have got to address. I understand how politically challenging it is. 90 people a day die in our country from guns. Homicide, suicide, and avoidable accidents, like what the gentleman was referring to. And it is imperative that people make this a voting issue. I know we can balance the legitimate rights of gun owners with the right to be safe going to school or going to church, the right to have more control over what happens in people going to stores to buy guns who shouldn't have them. So here's what I am proposing. Number one, we need universal background checks for real. We need to close the gun show loophole. We need to close the online loophole because people are buying guns and ammunition online. We have no idea who they are, and we know some of the mass murderers, that's how they got what they used to kill people. We need to close what's called the Charleston loophole. The Charleston loophole is unfortunately what enabled that young man to get a gun he's not entitled to. He was a felon. He had a felony conviction. But under the rules, 3 business days is all you get to find out. And the information hadn't been shared between 2 jurisdictions. So after 3 days, he went and got that gun, and he went to Mother Emanuel and he murdered those 9 wonderful people. And then we need to remove the immunity that gun makers and sellers have. They're the only industry in America that we give blanket immunity to. You can do anything. And then that gets to the final point I want to make about what you asked. Gun makers should be required to apply technology that currently exists so that guns owned by responsible adults cannot be operated by children, or if they are stolen, cannot be used by criminals. And what I am just appalled at are the numbers of young children, I'm talking toddlers, who go into a closet or go under a bed or open a drawer and there's a loaded gun. And these children kill themselves, they kill their playmates, they kill their siblings, they kill their parents, they injure people. That is crazy, my friends. So I know that the NRA and the gun lobby are powerful, but I think the American people are more powerful.
Secretary, we are the families of Black College, and we're one of them just next door. What is your HBCU plan to deal with HBCUs? Because we talk about black doctors and black lawyers and black engineers. They are being graduated from HBCUs. And will you reverse the Obama administration's Parent Plus loan change that led to 15